My family relentlessly mocked me for being poor and tried to force me into an abusive, highly controlling assistant job, completely unaware that I am a billionaire chief executive officer. Then my grandmother pulled me aside and revealed my parents forged my signature to steal my inheritance to fund my golden child brother's career, and now I am going to burn their entire fake corporate empire to the ground. Honestly, I never thought I would be sitting at my kitchen island at 2 o'clock in the morning typing this all out, but here we are. My name is Cassidy. I am 34 years old. Grab a drink, because this is going to be a long, exhausting ride, and I am just so incredibly tired of keeping this all inside. To give you some context, I own a cybersecurity architecture firm called Bastion Zero. We handle deep-level data privacy and threat mitigation for major financial institutions across the globe. Last year, the company was valued at $3.1 billion. But my family, they had absolutely no idea. As far as my parents, Arthur and Beatrice, were concerned, I was just a lowly information technology help desk operator pulling night shifts, crawling under desks to fix cables, and barely scraping by on minimum wage. Why the lie? Well, I mean, if you have ever read Marcus Aurelius and his book Meditations, he talks a lot about how you can only control your own mind, not external events. I read that book cover to cover in my 20s when my family basically wrote me off for not going to law school and cut me off financially. Aurelius says that the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. So, I decided a long time ago to keep my wealth completely hidden. I wanted to see how they would treat me when they thought I was a nobody, to strip away the pretense. I drove a dented 2012 sedan that squealed when I braked. I wore a faded grey fleece jacket with a broken zipper and carried a frayed canvas backpack. I played the part perfectly because I needed to know the truth about who they were. Thanksgiving Eve at my parents' sprawling colonial house in upstate New York was the ultimate test. The entire evening was less of a holiday gathering and more of a shrine dedicated to my older brother, Julian. He had just been appointed Chief Operations Officer of Apex Urban Developments, complete with a salary of $400,000 and a ridiculously flashy leased corporate vehicle parked proudly in the circular driveway. The dining room, smelling of roasted turkey and expensive cedar candles, practically vibrated with my mother's smugness. "My son is a true visionary," my mother announced, aggressively pouring expensive wine into everyone's glasses, but skipping mine. "A real leader. Not like some people, who are content staring at computer screens in a dark basement all night." She did not even look at me, but the implication was heavy enough to crack the floorboards. I just stared at my mashed potatoes. I mean, what was the point of arguing? My Aunt Clara leaned over, her heavy gold jewelry clinking against her plate, and asked if I could even afford to pay my heating bill this winter. Before I could even open my mouth to answer, Uncle Greg chimed in, loudly suggesting I go down to the local temp agency and find a job that required actual physical labor. "Sweeping floors builds character, Cassidy," he said, laughing at his own joke. Julian's wife, Vanessa, who served as the chief financial officer for his new firm, sat there examining her manicured nails. "Cassidy, if you just applied yourself, maybe you would not be wearing a jacket that looks like it was chewed by a feral dog," she muttered. I took a deep, slow breath, reciting a line from Meditations in my head to keep my composure. "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But then came the intervention. Yes, an actual, literal family intervention to fix my supposedly pathetic life. After dinner, they cornered me in the living room. Julian, looking like he just stepped out of a corporate lifestyle magazine, slid a thick manila folder across the mahogany coffee table. Inside was a freshly printed employment contract. "We are doing this because we love you, Cassidy," Julian said, though his eyes were completely dead and devoid of any actual warmth. "I need an administrative assistant. I am willing to pay you $42,000 a year out of my own budget. But there are conditions." I picked up the paperwork. It was completely unhinged. There were clauses dictating that I had to submit my monthly grocery budget to Vanessa for approval. Another clause explicitly stated I was not allowed to date without their permission, because my history of poor life choices reflected badly on the prestigious family brand they were trying to build. "This is your chance to finally become useful to society," my father, Arthur, said, crossing his arms and glaring at me. Do not throw this away. You are 34 years old. It is getting pathetic. Honestly, I felt physically sick. I asked for some time to think about it and walked out toward the kitchen to get some air. That was when my grandmother, Josephine, grabbed my arm. She's 82 years old, sharp as a tack, and the only person in that entire house who ever treated me like a human being instead of a failure. She pulled me into the dark laundry room off the hallway and pressed a cold metal key into my sweaty palm. It was for a safe deposit box at the downtown bank. They think I do not know, my grandmother whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of terrifying rage and deep sorrow. But I know exactly what they did, Cassidy. What are you talking about, Grandma? I asked, completely lost. She looked me dead in the eye in the dim light of the laundry room. Your parents, Arthur and Beatrice, they forged your signature 5 years ago. That beautiful coastal cabin your grandfather left you in his will. They stole the deed. They used it as collateral to take out a massive commercial loan to bail out Julian's very first failed startup. That is how he bought his way into the real estate game. They built his entire shiny career on your stolen inheritance. My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. The cabin. They had told me it was tied up in probate court for years, eventually lost to legal fees and unpaid property taxes. I had believed them. I had trusted my own parents. I stood there in the laundry room, the hum of the washing machine vibrating against my spine, gripping that tiny metal key so hard it dug into my skin. I did not scream. I did not cry. Aurelius wrote that a blazing fire makes flame and brightness out of everything that is thrown into it. In that moment, I became the fire. I hugged my grandmother, walked back out to the living room, and told Julian I would give him my answer by the end of the week. My plan to destroy them was already writing itself. I drove back to my apartment that night in absolute silence. No radio, no podcasts. Just the rattling of my terrible car, and the crushing weight of what my grandmother had told me. Honestly, I think my brain short-circuited. For years, I just assumed my parents were aggressively judgmental and favored my brother because he played the corporate game better than I did. I never imagined they were actual, literal thieves. They stole the only thing my grandfather ever gave me to prop up Julian's ego. I spent the entire weekend staring at the ceiling, drinking cheap coffee, and letting the anger wash over me. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. He says to realize this, and you will find strength. He also says that to be angry is to let the enemy win. I did not want to just be angry. I wanted to be surgical. I needed absolute, undeniable truth, and I needed to expose them in a way that left zero room for their usual gaslighting. So, I went back to work at Bastion Zero. I threw myself into my role as Chief Executive Officer. And as fate, or maybe just sheer poetic justice, would have it, a massive coincidence landed right on my mahogany desk about 3 weeks later. Bastion Zero was rapidly expanding. We needed to construct 3 new, heavily fortified subterranean server facilities on the East Coast to house our clients' most sensitive data. We had put out a request for proposals for the physical construction and infrastructure management. The contract was worth roughly $150 million. And guess which flashy real estate firm made it to the final round of bidding? Apex Urban Developments. Julian and Vanessa's company. They had absolutely no idea I was the founder of Bastion Zero. On paper, Bastion Zero is owned by a holding company with a very boring name, and my public profile is heavily scrubbed by my internal security team. To Julian and Vanessa, Bastion Zero was just a giant, faceless corporate whale they were desperately trying to harpoon to save their over-leveraged lifestyle. They started bragging about it incessantly in the family group chat. Julian was sending messages talking about how he was about to land a 9-figure deal that would make him the undisputed king of commercial real estate. My mother, Beatrice, was replying with dozens of heart emojis, calling him a business genius. It was honestly nauseating to read, but here is the thing about arrogant people, they get sloppy. About a week before the final pitch meetings, my chief compliance officer came into my office with a highly encrypted flash drive. We had received an anonymous whistleblower tip from a risk analyst buried deep inside the accounting department at Apex Urban Developments. Because the proposed contract with Bastion Zero was so massive, the analyst got spooked and decided to leak their internal books to us to avoid federal conspiracy charges if things went south. I spent 12 hours going through those files. It was a complete disaster. Vanessa, acting as Chief Financial Officer, had been aggressively cooking the books for at least 4 years. She was inflating the appraised values of their existing commercial properties by 30 to 40% just to secure more mezzanine financing. She was generating completely fake invoices for construction materials that never existed, funneling the money into shell companies to make their operational cash flow look incredibly robust. Their entire company was a massive house of cards built on fraudulent loans. And Julian was the one signing off on all of it. I printed every single document. I cross-referenced the financial fraud with the real estate records regarding my stolen cabin. It was all there. The original seed money Julian used to start his first company, the one that merged into Apex, came directly from the commercial loan my parents took out using my forged signature on the deed. It was all fruit of the poisonous tree. Fast forward to Christmas Day. The final in-person pitch was scheduled for the very next morning, December 26th, at 9 o'clock. My parents hosted a brunch. I showed up in my usual worn-out clothes, playing the part of the exhausted help desk worker. Vanessa cornered me in the kitchen while I was pouring a glass of orange juice. She was wearing a designer silk blouse and reeked of expensive perfume. She leaned in close, her eyes narrowed. "Listen to me, Cassidy," she hissed, glancing over her shoulder to make sure Julian was not listening. "Julian has the biggest meeting of his entire life tomorrow at Bastion Zero. I do not want you texting him with your drama, and I do not want you causing any trouble. You are an absolute embarrassment to this family, and if you ruin his focus, I will personally make sure you never see a dime from Arthur and Beatrice ever again." I just looked at her, blinking slowly. "I would not dream of ruining his focus, Vanessa," I said quietly. Julian walked into the kitchen right then, adjusting his perfectly tailored suit jacket. He looked me up and down with utter disgust. "I am heading into the city tomorrow for the Bastion Zero pitch. Tell you what, Cassidy. I will let you carry my briefcase from the parking garage to the lobby. Maybe while you are standing there, one of their human resources directors will take pity on you and offer you a job scrubbing the toilets. It pays better than whatever pathetic IT gig you are failing at right now." He laughed. Vanessa laughed. I just smiled, a small, tight smile, and told him I would meet him at the Bastion Zero parking garage at 8:30 in the morning. I told him I would be honored to carry his briefcase. As soon as I left their house, I sat in my freezing car and called my executive personal assistant, Harper. I did not just want to reject their proposal. I wanted them annihilated on the public record. "Harper," I said, watching my breath fog up the windshield, "I need you to reach out to Elias Thorne at the Financial Times. He has been begging me for an exclusive interview on corporate ethics for 6 months. Tell him he can have his exclusive. Tell him to be in the main boardroom tomorrow morning at 8:45. He is going to pose as a junior risk assessor for Bastion Zero. He can record the entire thing." "Consider it done, boss," Harper replied. "Aurelius says that the object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." I was finally about to completely remove myself from their insanity, but not before I let them set their own world on fire. The morning of December 26th was brutally cold, the kind of cold that makes your bones ache. I stood shivering in the sweeping glass atrium of Bastion Zero's global headquarters at exactly 8:30. I was wearing my frayed grey fleece jacket and a pair of scuffed boots. I really committed to the bit. A few minutes later, Julian and Vanessa walked through the revolving doors, flanked by my parents, Arthur and Beatrice. Yes, Julian actually brought our parents to a corporate pitch. He had officially listed them as senior advisory consultants for Apex Urban Developments, which was really just a pathetic excuse for him to have an audience for his big moment of triumph. Julian spotted me near the security turnstiles. He did not even say good morning. He just walked up, shoved his heavy leather briefcase into my chest, and sneered. "Take this up to the 6th to 5th floor. When we get into the boardroom, you stand in the absolute farthest corner, you keep your mouth shut, and you do not bother anyone. Try not to breathe too loudly." I nodded, gripping the handle of the briefcase. "Sure thing, Julian." We rode the private elevator up in absolute silence. My mother spent the entire ride fixing Julian's tie and whispering about how proud she was. When the doors opened to the executive floor, they strutted out like they owned the planet. The main boardroom was massive, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. My entire executive team was already seated at the long mahogany table. Elias Thorne, the journalist from the Financial Times, was sitting quietly near the back, a notebook open in front of him, posing perfectly as a junior risk assessor. I shuffled into the room behind my family, clutching the briefcase, and went straight to the darkest corner by the coat rack. Julian unpacked his laptop at the presenter's podium. He looked around the room, clearing his throat, turning on his most charismatic, fake smile. "Good morning, everyone," Julian said, his voice booming. "We are thrilled to be here. I know we are just waiting on your founder and chief executive officer to begin." My chief operating officer, a brilliant man named David, looked at his watch, completely deadpan. "Actually, she is already here." Julian looked confused. "I am sorry." I stepped out of the shadows in the corner of the room. I walked slowly across the thick carpet, carrying Julian's briefcase. The entire room went dead silent. I walked past my mother, whose jaw had literally dropped open. I walked past Vanessa, who looked like she had just seen a ghost. I walked right up to the head of the table, dropped Julian's briefcase onto the polished wood with a loud thud, and sat down in the chairman's leather seat. I looked right at my brother. "Hello, Julian. Please, go ahead with your presentation. We are all fascinated to hear about your robust financials." Julian started stammering. "Cassidy, what are you doing in that chair? Get up, get out of here before you ruin this." David leaned forward into his microphone. "Mr. Whitmore, I suggest you lower your voice when speaking to the founder and controlling shareholder of Bastion Zero." The blood completely drained from Julian's face. He staggered back a step, gripping the podium. My mother let out a weird, strangled gasp and grabbed my father's arm. Honestly, it was the single most satisfying moment of my entire life. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." My family had lived a massive, towering life for years. It was time for the truth. I tapped a button on my tablet, and the giant digital screen behind Julian flickered to life. I did not show his glossy marketing slides. I projected the raw, leaked financial data from Apex Urban Developments. "Let us talk about your transparency, Julian," I said, my voice echoing in the massive room. "Because according to these audited ledgers, Vanessa has been artificially inflating your warehouse and commercial property assets by 40%. You have been generating completely fabricated invoices for raw materials to hide your massive debt-to-income ratio." Vanessa jumped up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That is a lie. This is illegal. You hacked us." "Actually, Vanessa, it was a whistleblower," I replied calmly, pulling up the next slide. It was a massive, high-definition screenshot of an internal corporate email. "But my favorite part is this email, sent from Julian directly to you, dated 3 days ago. Quote, clean up all the evidence before Bastion Zero audits us, you take responsibility. End quote. The journalist in the corner was writing furiously. The silence in the room was suffocating. Suddenly, my father, Arthur, slammed his fists on the table. His face was purple with rage. You ungrateful little witch, he screamed at me. You set up your own brother. You are jealous. Julian built his empire from the ground up with his own 2 hands, with honest money, while you were doing whatever this is. Honest money? I asked, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. Let us talk about honest money. I pressed another button. The video conference system dialed out, and 2 faces appeared on the screen. It was my grandmother, Josephine, sitting next to my personal corporate attorney. Grandma, Julian whispered, completely bewildered. My attorney held up a thick manila folder to the camera. We have the original deed transfer for the coastal property inherited by Cassidy, he said clearly. We also have a forensic handwriting analysis confirming that the signature on this deed is a complete forgery. Furthermore, we have stamped university attendance records proving that on the exact date this deed was supposedly signed in New York, Cassidy was 1,500 miles away in Chicago, taking her final exams. My grandmother leaned into the camera, her eyes completely devoid of pity. Arthur, Beatrice, she said, her voice shaking with disgust. You cheated your own daughter. You stole her inheritance to buy your son's fake success. And now the whole world is going to know exactly what kind of people you are. Julian looked like he was going to vomit. He looked frantically at the screen, then at me, then at the other executives in the room. What Julian did not realize was that there were other people silently listening in on the conference call. I had quietly invited representatives from the primary bank that held all of Apex's commercial loans, as well as 2 of his minority board members. A voice crackled over the boardroom speakers. It was the vice president of the bank. Julian, effective immediately, we are freezing all credit lines to Apex Urban Developments. We are calling in our loans, and our legal team is contacting the Federal Economic Crimes Division as we speak. Checkmate. I sat back in my chair, smoothing down my frayed grey fleece jacket. The aftermath was, honestly, the most surreal thing I have ever witnessed in my entire life. My security team politely, but firmly escorted my family out of the building. Julian did not even try to grab his briefcase. He just left it sitting there on the mahogany table like a tombstone. My mother was sobbing hysterically, and my father looked like he was going to have a stroke, his face completely pale and slick with sweat. I mean, if you think corporate justice moves slowly, you have never seen a bank panic. Within 48 hours, the financial institution holding all of Apex Urban Development's debt completely gutted them. Julian lost everything. The bank foreclosed on his massive house, and the leasing company came and repossessed his flashy corporate vehicle right out of his driveway in the middle of the night. Vanessa, being the absolute master of self-preservation that she is, did exactly what you would expect a rat on a sinking ship to do. She immediately filed for divorce, claiming she had absolutely no knowledge of the financial fraud, despite being the chief financial officer. She filed for sole custody of their children and basically threw Julian to the federal investigators to save her own skin. As for my parents, Arthur and Beatrice, my legal team gave them a very simple, very brutal ultimatum. They could either sign the deed to the coastal cabin completely back over to me and reimburse every single dollar of my legal fees, or my attorneys would hand the forged documents over to the district attorney and press felony fraud charges. Faced with the prospect of spending their retirement in a federal penitentiary, they folded instantly. They signed the paperwork in my lawyer's office without making eye contact with anyone. And Aunt Clara and Uncle Greg, the ones who told me to go get a job sweeping floors, they completely vanished. I did not get a text, an email, or a phone call. Not a single word of apology. They just scurried back into the shadows the second they realized I was not the family punching bag anymore. I finally drove out to the coast to look at the cabin my grandfather left me. It was beautiful, sitting right on a rocky cliff overlooking the ocean, but standing there on the porch, I just felt sick. The whole property was tainted by what my parents had done. It felt like dirty money, and I wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a good man does not just refrain from doing harm, he actively seeks to do good for his fellow citizens. He says that whatever action you take, it should be directed to the social end. I realized then that I did not need a vacation house. I needed to build something that actually mattered. So, I brought in a demolition crew and tore the old cabin down to the studs. In its place, I funded the construction of the Bastion Zero Information Technology Vocational Training Center. I poured millions of dollars into building state-of-the-art server rooms, coding laboratories, and lecture halls. I dedicated the entire facility to the very people my family had always looked down on. The help desk operators, the cable pullers, the night shift server technicians who are just scraping by on minimum wage. Every single year, the center provides full-ride scholarships, housing, and advanced cybersecurity certification training to over 500 working-class students. I made sure the grand opening was heavily publicized in all the major business journals. I knew Julian and my parents would see it. The day after the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I sat down at my kitchen island and drafted a long, physical letter. I printed out 5 copies. One for Arthur, one for Beatrice, one for Julian, one for Aunt Clara, and one for Uncle Greg. I did not send one to my grandmother, of course. I poured a glass of wine, staring at the paper before I sealed the envelopes. I wanted to make sure they understood exactly why this was happening. I wanted them to know that this was not a temper tantrum. It was an absolute, permanent severing of ties. The last paragraph of the letter read exactly like this. I am not leaving you because I am rich, and I am not leaving you because I want to punish you. I am leaving because I have finally learned not to give the power of being loved to people who only know how to love numbers. You looked at me and saw a liability. You looked at Julian and saw an investment. I hope your ledgers keep you warm at night, because from this moment forward, I am completely bankrupt when it comes to this family. I drove to the post office and sent all 5 letters via certified mail, so I would get a notification the exact second they signed for them. Then, I went back to my car, pulled out my phone, and permanently blocked every single one of their phone numbers. I blocked their email addresses. I blocked their social media accounts. That same weekend, I packed up my apartment, broke my lease, and moved into a beautiful new penthouse closer to my corporate headquarters. I left no forwarding address. I made a solemn vow to myself right then and there that I would never, under any circumstances, attend another family holiday, birthday, or funeral ever again. I was finally, truly free from their exhausting, toxic gravity. For 6 solid months, I lived in absolute, beautiful silence. I mean, it was almost eerie at first. No passive-aggressive text messages from my mother criticizing my hairstyle, no arrogant holiday group chats from Julian bragging about his latest golf handicap, and no forced family dinners, where I had to sit there and swallow my pride while eating dry turkey. I just focused on running Bastion Zero, expanding our cybersecurity contracts, and watching the first class of students graduate from the new vocational center. I honestly thought the book was completely closed on my family. But then, on a rainy Tuesday in early June, my executive personal assistant walked into my office and handed me a small, slightly crumpled envelope. It was forwarded from my old apartment building. The handwriting on the front was shaky, written in faded blue ink. I recognized it immediately. It was from my grandmother, Josephine. I opened it carefully with a letter opener. Inside was a single piece of lined notebook paper, torn from a spiral pad. There were no pleasantries, no long explanations about how she was doing. It just said, "You did the right thing, Cassidy. Your grandfather would be so incredibly proud of the fire you started." The return address was for a high-end assisted living facility about 2 hours north of the city. I cancelled all my afternoon meetings, told my chief operating officer to handle the quarterly earnings call, and drove up there that very weekend. The nursing home smelled like lemon disinfectant and boiled vegetables. I found my grandmother sitting in a floral armchair by a large window in her private room, watching the rain hit the glass. She looked so much smaller than she had at that awful Thanksgiving dinner just months ago, frail and deeply tired. But when she turned her head and saw me standing in the doorway, her eyes lit up with that same sharp, unyielding spark. We talked for 3 hours. It was, honestly, the most honest conversation I have ever had with another human being. She told me that Arthur and Beatrice had stopped visiting her entirely after the scandal broke, blaming her for taking my side and ruining Julian's life. I felt a pang of guilt, but she just waved her frail hand and told me not to carry their sins on my shoulders. Right before visiting hours ended, Josephine reached into the drawer of her bedside table and pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. The spine was cracking, and the pages were yellowed with age. She placed it into my hands and wrapped her cold fingers around mine. "Your grandfather and I were not fools, Cassidy," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the rain outside. "We knew exactly what kind of greedy, hollow man your father was growing up to be. We knew he would try to take everything for his golden boy. The coastal cabin was just a distraction." I opened the journal. It was not a diary. It was a meticulous, handwritten ledger of secret investment portfolios, municipal bonds, and offshore trust accounts that my grandparents had quietly built over 40 years. They had hidden it all behind a labyrinth of anonymous shell corporations, completely untouchable by my parents or my brother. "It is all legally transferred into your name, effective upon my death," Josephine said, leaning back in her chair and closing her eyes. "There is nearly $8 million in those accounts. Do not save it. Build something massive. Burn their legacy to the absolute ground by building a better one." That was the last time I ever saw her. My grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep exactly 2 weeks later. I attended a small, private memorial service just for her close friends at the facility. My parents and my brother were notably absent. When the trusts officially cleared probate a month later, I did exactly what she asked me to do. I took every single cent of that $8 million and injected it directly into the Bastion Zero Information Technology Vocational Training Center. But I did not just expand the local campus. I bought real estate in Chicago, Austin, and Seattle. I took the foundation completely nationwide. Now, we are pulling thousands of working-class kids out of dead-end jobs every single year, teaching them high-level network engineering and data privacy architecture, and getting them hired at Fortune 500 companies. We are giving them the exact leverage my family tried to deny me. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Just be one." I spent so much of my 20s and early 30s arguing with ghosts, trying to prove my worth to a family that was completely incapable of seeing me as anything other than a failed asset. I am writing this all out today because I know there are people reading this who are sitting at family dinners right now, wearing a frayed sweater, letting their arrogant relatives talk down to them because they do not have a flashy title or a leased corporate vehicle. Listen to me, and please hear me clearly. Respect is not something you demand, and it is definitely not something you can buy with a $400,000 salary. Respect is something you earn by how you treat the people who have absolutely nothing to offer you. When someone only values you for your net worth, your job title, or what you can do to elevate their personal brand, that is not love. That is just a conditional investment. And the absolute best thing you can do with a bad investment is cut your losses, close the account, and walk away forever. Keep your head down, build your own empire in the dark, and let them choke on the smoke when you finally decide to strike the match.